Okay, hi everyone. We're looking at B part 3 of your practice 7. Okay, generally the steps are there, ideas are there, but there are people missing a lot of things that they should be doing. Okay, now for 4 marks, you're supposed to account for the changes. So maybe you should account for the overall changes. Okay, account for the, so things like I want to see things like the economic growth. I need people to define the disposable income, how it affects disposable income. Okay, so this one should come beforehand. Okay, and then you need to go on to tell me about how it then affects purchasing power and then the affordability of the meat. Okay, so this and consumption. So this would have given the deal with the overall changes. That means overall eat more plus more non-staples in the diet. Okay, but a lot of you forgot the last one. You forgot to talk about the changes to the staples, or at least the cereals. Okay, so why is there little change? This one is not accounted for. Okay, now if you're able to explain why roots has a greater increase than cereals, good. Okay, unfortunately no one has it, neither do I. Now the factors apply for that. Okay, because what we learn is more of that there's a greater increase in cereals than roots, and roots will have decreased. So at least give me the reason why there's little change to the staples consumed. Okay, so these are the things that most of you have missed out, this part, the economic growth. Okay, or some of you say that the economic growth is for the whole world. No, it's actually only within LDCs. DCs have much more or less developed, it's more or less developed already. Okay, now some mistakes here. Now, number one, quite a few of you forgot to change the question to B part 1. Okay, so if you did not change the question to B part 1, then I will mark according to this. Okay, so if you change to B part 1, I will expect you to talk about staples and non-staples. Now, if you did not change the question to B part 1, you only put it to B part 2, then my question will be, B part 2 is about meat and cereals. Why are you talking about staples, non-staples? When if you didn't change the question, when you leave it as B part 2, you should focus only on meat and cereals. Okay, so please explain to the question. Don't just assume it's staples, non-staples. Sometimes they may ask you to specify certain categories. Okay, now so please take note, and I want you all to put this in and do the proper correction. Okay, and you need to tell me what are the things that you have done correctly. Okay, now what's the reasons for little change in cereals? Well, I think a few of you have brought it up very clearly. Some of you said that because meat is seen as a luxury and a status symbol. Okay, so over staples like cereals. So therefore, when there's more money, more disposable income, they prefer to buy more meat than cereals, which account for why cereals there's hardly any changes. Okay, or if you want to put it as non-staples, also possible. Okay, so this is the reason I've given you. Now the other parts, please go and write it in properly. Okay, I repeat that the economic growth is mostly in LDCs. DCs were quite developed. There wasn't much more economic growth already. Okay, so like Singapore is quite developed, US quite developed. Our economy grow only by 1 or 2% right now, at most 4 or 5%. If it happens to 4 or 5%, we are all laughing to the bank. Okay, it's a miracle. But what happened in these countries like Singapore in the 60s, China in the 60s, in the 80s, is that they increased by about 8 to 10% every year. Okay, or some cases even double digit, 15%. Okay, so there's a lot more change than what DCs are experiencing or had experienced. Okay, so you need to understand this to respond to this correctly. Okay, so these learning points, please take note. Likewise, when you do your practice 8, okay, when I ask you to account for the differences, explain the differences, please go into it properly and make sure you don't make the same mistakes anymore. Okay, alright, likewise for part 4, describe and explain the expected food consumption trends. Okay, that means from 2005 to 2025 they expected this. Why do they expect such differences? Expect the food consumption trend to be like this. Okay,